This next project is actually going to be the TicTacToe project again, except that we're going to be creating something called a graphical user interface. What this means is that we're going to be using windows and buttons and things of that nature to create the interface rather than trying to use the command line. So I need to create a new Java project. GUI TicTacToe, graphical user interface. I pronounce it GUI because that makes it funnier. Done. And I need to create a new class, which I'm going to name the same thing, and make sure that it has a main. All right, so what all is involved in a GUI? It turns out there's a little bit of history you need to know. Originally, there was something called AWT, or Abstract Windowing Toolkit. This was a first attempt by Java to create these things called windows. They're called frames, buttons were called buttons, and so on. It turns out that that first attempt was just not very good, and so they actually made a second attempt at making a better version of it. That stuff is called Swing. So these are much better versions of buttons and frames and whatnot. They just work better. Now, the problem is that there were a whole bunch of classes already named, frame, and button, and these sorts of things. So what ended up happening is that anytime that they created something, let's say, called a frame, they just added a J to the front of it. So a Jframe is what we're going to be using, and that's the Swing version of these things. There are occasionally AWT components we'll use, which are okay, but most of the things that we'll be using in this project are from Swing, which is J and then the name of something. So the window that we start with is called a Jframe. So let's actually do our constructor like we always do. GUI TicTacToe, public GUI TicTacToe. Now it becomes especially important in this particular project to make sure you get out of main. We're not allowed to use static methods with global variables, so you're going to want to make sure that you create a constructor and start it from main. Jframe is our basic window. I'm going to create a new Jframe up here, which is going to be global. Frame is what I'm going to call it. So new Jframe. It's complaining because it doesn't know what that is, so I'm going to go ahead and import that. By the way, everything we're going to be using is in the javax.swing package. All right, so what can I do with a frame? Well, to begin with, let's go take a look at it. Java API. All right, Jframe, I. There's a Jframe. So this is talking about how to make frames in the Java tutorial, so it's got a nice link to that. That's kind of cool. Here's some information about nested classes, fields, what we're allowed to do, constructors. So, hey, if you want a title for your window, you put in a string in the parentheses. That's kind of cool. Get graphics, get layered look, set containers. Interesting. Now, keep in mind that Jframe is a child of Java AWT Frame. What that means is that it gets everything that Frame can do automatically. For example, you can set whether it's resizable or not, and that's actually contained in Frame if you want to go look at what that does. It gets everything from a window, like set visible. That's going to be important. Set size. That's also important. Container, component. So all of these things, Jframes are able to do automatically. If you look up at the top here, Jframe is a child of frame, which is a child of window, which is a child of container, child of component, and a child of capital O object, which is the granddaddy of all possible objects that are made in Java. So Jframes can do a ton of stuff. So what we want to do is we want to create a new one of these, and there's a few steps I need to do to even begin to work on this. First thing I should do is I should set its size. So I'm going to use one which requires an x and a y argument. I don't know what size I want yet. I'll go just put something in for now and see what it looks like, and maybe come back and change this later. So I need to set the size. The second thing I need to do is I actually need to make sure that This window is going to have a little red X, kind of like up here in our Eclipse thing. And I need to make sure that when I hit that button, it actually stops running the program. Otherwise, I'll close my window, but it'll still be running in the background. And as you may know from accidentally running lots and lots of projects, that will eventually cause problems. So what I'm going to say is frame.setDefaultClose It's this guy here. And I need to say jframe.exitOnClose. This makes it so that by default, when you actually close the window, it also closes the whole program. And then finally, I should set it visible so I can actually see my awesome window. So let's run this as a Java application. Look, a window. Well, that was exciting. Anyway, so now I need to actually put things into this window. So let's go ahead and make a J button. As you would expect, this is a thing that has some text in it. You can click on it, and eventually it will do things. New J button. Let's see, what should I have it say? Click me. I'll start with that. It's complaining because I haven't imported it yet, so I need to do that. And now I need to somehow add it to my frame. Now by default, when you put something into a frame, it actually looks kind of funny. We actually need to say what this frame's layout is going to be. So there's a variety of layouts that you can do in Java. The two that we're going to be mostly concerned about are a grid layout and a border layout. So to begin with, let me start with a border layout. So the frame's layout is going to be a new border layout. It's complaining because it doesn't know what that is, so we need to import that. So a border layout, that is a layout which has a north, south, east, and west. So let's go look up what kind of things we can do. Let's see. So here are things that, here's a visual guide to what different kinds of layouts you can have. So a border layout has a center, a north, a south, a west, and an east. So that's the one that we're going to start out with. My plan is that I'm going to put all of my tic-tac-toe buttons actually in the center and a different layout inside of that. I'm going to put some labels up at the top so that you can find out how many wins you have and change your name if you want. So that's a border layout. You can also do something called a box layout, which allows you to set components kind of in an order. There's also something called a card layout, which looks something like this, where you combine different kinds of components and put them together. A flow layout just puts them in order, left to right. A grid layout is what we're going to use for tic-tac-toe, and a grid bag layout is something very similar, except that a grid bag layout is more powerful. You can set margins, borders, have it span across multiple grid things, but the thing is that you must actually define absolutely everything that goes into this grid bag layout. So this is more powerful but more complicated to use. The grid layout itself is a more simple one. There's also a few others, group, spring, so on. So I would like to use a border layout, and I'll just put my button in the center for now. So the way that you add something into, for example, a window is you say the name of the thing you're adding into, add, and the thing that's getting added to it. And then if you have something like a border layout, you have to say where it's going to be. In my case, I want it in the center. So if I add this, look, it's a giant button. That's exciting. It doesn't do anything, but eventually it will. So now I should try creating an actual grid of buttons. So I'm actually going to put in place of this button a grid of buttons. So I need to replace the border layout with a grid layout. Now I just want the center thing in the middle of the border layout to be a grid layout though. So I kind of want a layout inside of a layout. There's a way to do that using something called a container. Container is a built-in class, and its only job basically is to put objects inside of other objects as far as the layers go. Or, I'm sorry, as far as the layouts go. So if the layout is a border layout and you want a grid layout inside it, you place a container inside and give it a separate layout. So for example, this guy is going to be my center. So I need to import this container. It's actually an AWT. Boy, look at all these things we've got. So center is going to have a layout which is a new grid layout. Now grid requires how many rows and columns. This being tic-tac-toe, I'm going to do 3 by 3. It's complaining because it's like, what is that thing? So now center is a grid layout, and everything I add into it will be laid out in a grid, basically starting at the top row from left to right. I would like to create more than just one button, so I'm actually going to change this to an array of buttons. And in fact, it's going to be a 2-dimensional array. So I'm going to set up a 3 by 3 array of buttons. Now keep in mind, this has made space for these J buttons, but it's actually not created them yet. I actually have to manually do that. If I try and get the 00 J button out of here, I will get a null pointer exception. What that means is I'm trying to get a button which doesn't actually exist yet.